Welcome everyone. As you join in, please say hello in the chat and share where you're joining from. Let me start by introducing myself. My name is Ashley Pena, and I'm part of the Tribal Victim Services Training and Technical Assistance Team, or TVISTA for short, at the Office for Victims of Crime. As we get started, I wanted to acknowledge everyone joining us today and how excited we are to have you here. Missing or murdered Indigenous people, human trafficking, and victimization are difficult topics. As we move through this conversation, if you need support or to talk to someone, please contact Strong Hearts Native Helpline. Their information is in the chat. The National Human Trafficking Hotline is also a resource if you or a loved one experience or are experiencing human trafficking. All conversations are confidential and anonymous. Now I'd like to welcome our moderator, Taisha Wood. So I will turn it over to you, Taisha.
Hello, everyone. So many places I'm seeing on the chat, from Nebraska to Minneapolis, Alaska. My name is Taisha Wood. Yat'e. Good day to everyone. I am a member of the Navajo Nation. My clans are Twotsoni Nishlant Betlejina Bashichin, Betachni Deshache, Hashkana Zohni Deshanele, Saiga Hodzan de Nasha. And today I will be your moderator for our discussion. Our discussion today is on the important role of law enforcement when a loved one goes missing. Time is critical, and law enforcement investigations can determine if an individual is in danger or if a loved one is a victim of a crime. Law enforcement partners take missing person reports, initiate searches, and distribute information to other law enforcement agencies in the state, federal, and tribal sectors. This is going to be a great information sharing event. As always, we look forward to hearing your questions, and we are really looking forward to our panelists' perspectives on the topic. Before we get started, as a reminder to our participants, please submit your questions to the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. Joining us today are three panelists: Captain Andrew Merrill, Major Nathan Barton, and Mr. David Rogers. I invite each of them to say hello and offer a brief introduction. Captain Merrill, let's start with you.
Hi, good morning, and I'm happy to be joining you today from Anchorage, Alaska. My name is Andrew Merrill. I am a captain with the Alaska State Troopers. I am based here in Anchorage, Alaska, and I command what we call C Detachment or Charlie Detachment, which is Western Alaska, which ranges from the Aleutian Islands, Kodiak, Dillingham, through the Yukon-Kuskokwim region up to the Bering Straits and Northwest Arctic Borough. Kotzebue area, and I've been a trooper for approximately a little over 20 years, give or take a few years. I've worked in investigations, court services, as well as conducting investigations in search and rescue, homicides, negotiations. I've been a department pilot. Personally, I've been stationed in Fairbanks, is where I started with the state troopers. And then from there, I went to Bethel and served in Bethel for a little over 5 years. And then I went to Nome, and then I have been here in Anchorage and have worked with our Village Public Safety Officer program, or the VPSO program, and then have taken over C Detachment about 4 years ago. So that's a little bit about me.
Thank you, Captain Merrill. Major Barton, we'll have you go next.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Taisha. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm honored to be here and grateful for this opportunity to speak to all of you near and far. My name is Nathan Barton. I'm the major of the Pueblo Poaque Police Department. I oversee all day-to-day operations from patrol, dispatch, records, evidence, and everything in between. We'll talk a little bit today about our missing and murdered Indigenous persons response plans and protocols. I have 22 years in law enforcement. Currently in this position, I've been here 9.5 years. I started out as an officer and promoted through the ranks here with our current agency. Again, it's an honor to be here. Taisha, Thank you. And we look forward to answering some questions and chatting with everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, Major Barton. Dave, on to you.
Thank you, Taisha. My name is David Rogers. I'm enrolled with the Nez Perce tribe. I also have family with the Winnebago tribe and the Lakotas. This is my 50th year of work in justice programs coming up. I did 22 years in law enforcement, been a chief of police of both tribal and non-tribal agencies, including my own tribe in the Nez Perce from 2013 to 16 approximately. Up until May, I was the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Persons Coordinator for the U.S. Attorney's Office in the state of Washington for both the Eastern and Western districts. And currently, I'm the Deputy Director for the National Native Center of Excellence, which is housed within Chestnut Health and the Lighthouse Institute, where we are working on building our Missing and Murdered Indigenous Persons training into a 4-pronged project, which includes the tribal community response plans, prevention, healing, and working on collaboration efforts on how to work together to build these plans.
Thank you so much, Dave. We are honored to have each of you here with us and to share your knowledge and your expertise from the areas of which you currently work. As you heard, we have the 3 panelists are spanned across the country, so we're really eager to hear what they say about the community that they serve and the work that they're doing. Now, panelists, to start our discussion, I'd like to ask you a few questions of our own. Following the initial questions that you have, we will shift to questions of the participants. Again, please enter your questions, participants, at any time through the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. All right, folks. Captain Merrill, I'm going to start with you. What is law enforcement's role in addressing the MMIP crisis?
Thank you, Taisha. I appreciate that. So we know that MMIP, and having been a member of our statewide MMIP working group for the last almost 3 years, is a significant problem. And one of the things that I loved about the MMIP process in our group, specifically here in Alaska, is the fact that we have brought in so many stakeholders and members of the tribes to work with us and provide education. And so one of law enforcement's, or our major role as law enforcement, is working with communities and with the families of missing people to help locate them and bring them home, or to find out the facts that surround the circumstances, whether they be criminal or non-criminal. And so as we work as a team, we realize that every missing person case should initially be treated or considered as a criminal investigation until enough information is obtained to rule out that criminal activities occurred. And once a case has been determined or a missing person has been determined not to be criminal, which in Alaska we refer to that as search and rescue typically, then we have that responsibility to work with the agencies that are partners in that. And so depending on your jurisdiction, wherever you might be, it could be a little bit different. But when a case is determined to be non-criminal in nature, in Alaska, we then are coordinating with multiple organizations and agencies. So for example, if it's water-based, we're dealing with the Coast Guard. If it's air-based, we're dealing with the FAA or the NTSB. If it's on national parkland, it's going to be with the park rangers. And so we coordinate with those groups in non-criminal investigations, specifically through what we call the RCC model, which is the Rescue Coordination Center model. And that group is a group of people from each agency. So the Coast Guard, the national parks, the state troopers, and some municipal agencies have representatives that are part of that task force. And when we have a missing person group, we go to that RCC and we look for resources for looking for people in a search and rescue non-criminal type situation. Recognizing that those can change from a non-criminal investigation immediately back into a criminal investigation. Sometimes we have people who we think have gone missing because they've been out hunting, and we find information or have facts that show that it now is criminal. Maybe we find evidence of assault or of homicide. And so that changes quickly. And so for law enforcement, we try to be flexible with how we address and work with those. So when we talk about the actual murdered part of it, those cases are governed by standard practices for evidence collection and then investigative techniques. One area that we have found that we, especially specifically in Alaska, struggle with is we do a pretty good job with the actual investigations, but we don't do a very good job of coordinating with family and keeping them in the loop. And so one of the things that part of our MMIP group study that we did in Alaska showed was that we need to do a better job of providing that information and keeping families aware of what is happening in the investigation. And so in Alaska, last year, we specifically asked for budgeting and funding to have positions in the department that are specifically, we're calling them navigators. And so they are our law enforcement navigator positions that are designed to be the interface between our victim families and the law enforcement officers. We're currently in Alaska. We have about a 33% vacancy rate of trooper positions. And so our troopers just don't have time to conduct the investigations and then do that follow-up. And so these new navigator positions are our attempt to try to do that. And so they'll be that conduit of information to the family and can answer some of the general day-to-day questions and keep the families of the victims of missing people as well as murdered people up to date on the status of the investigation. And so our major role is to work with the communities, to work with the tribes, and to work with the families on finding our missing people and doing quality investigations to help find out the facts that we can. We can't always do everything, but we do our best.
Thank you, Captain Merrill. There was something missing on that last part, maybe probably from my end. Can you repeat that last part? I think it sounded like it was really important. Can you repeat the last part of your response?
Absolutely. So it is hard sometimes for law enforcement to admit that we aren't perfect. And so one of the things that I love about my agency is that we are not afraid to look internally to see how we can improve. And in one area that we have found that we have failed is keeping families and communities up to date and apprised of the status of search and rescues and of criminal investigations. And so we've hired these new navigators whose main role it is. Some of them are advocates and some of them are have come from attorney's offices. They used to be like paralegals or some states and some places call them witness advocates or witness paralegals. In our department, we have them as their navigators, and they're going to be that interface. And so it's our goal to help victims and families understand what we're doing. Sometimes there's questions that we won't be able to answer because we can't share some investigative details because we don't want to damage our case if we do find a suspect. But these are there to help us build that trust and relationship with the victims' families.
Thank you for repeating yourself, Captain Merrill. I didn't have any issues. I just thought that was a very strong point that you had in working with communities and recognizing and sharing resources when something like this happens in the community. Thank you again. My next question is for Major Barton. This is a two-part question. One, how can law enforcement support families searching for a missing loved one or grieving someone who has been murdered? And can you share how your police department, the Pueblo of Pojoaque Police, has worked with grassroots advocates and victim service providers to support families?
Absolutely, Taisha, and this is a great question, and I'd be happy to talk about it with our team, or how our team incorporates this. This is something that's a huge and important cog in this total response for a missing person or a murdered person, especially here in Indian country. And our response as a whole from law enforcement, we need to incorporate this part. And we identified that caveat in our planning a few years ago when we started to rework our policies and our operations. Excuse me. We visited the Amber Alert in Indian country symposium that was hosted here in New Mexico in 2018. And we saw plenty of gaps in our coverage. And just like Captain Merrill spoke about, we are good with looking inside and seeing what we can do and change. And we immediately went to work on our policies and procedures as it went to response. As we grew that, and Savannah's Act and the Not Invisible Act came into law in October of 2020, we were invited to work with the United States Attorney's Office here in our district on the Tribal Community Response Plan and pilot program. When we sat down at the table, we identified some things that obviously we wanted to further with our policy, but also include in our response plans. And part of that was our behavioral health team. The Pueblo Pocket actually has a fully staffed and fully functional behavioral health team that works for the Pueblo and provides services to tribal members, spouses of tribal members, even those that may be non-tribal. And so when we spoke to them about our response plan and their availability in the event something tragic of this magnitude happens, can we call on you to be a part of this response? And they were wholeheartedly in. They were like, let's do it, put us down. And so they're on our call tree. They're a part of it. We work with them about what response we would like to see from their team, how quickly, but then also for continuing support, not just the initial response, but this is something that stays with families forever. It doesn't just go away. So we worked with them on how our process would be to get them to a scene or to follow up a day, 24 hours later, depending on how things were working as the investigation evolved. But our behavioral health team is absolutely part of our response plans. And should they become overwhelmed, they actually have contracts in place with outside providers, i.e. those grassroots advocates outside of the Pueblo Pocket, whether it be through BIA, FBI, the U.S. Attorney's Office, or some private entities here that they've worked with in the past. They are also willing to assist us in that event and help support families, but also support the first responders that may be responding to these traumatic events, because we know we're not perfect as first responders, and we're going to be hard on ourselves while we're trying to help these families. But in this unfortunate event, we do have that in place, and they are an integral part of our response, not just for this type of response, but for any of them. And we look to make this historical law enforcement only response. Here for us, we want to change it to a community response, and we want to bring as many vested partners to the table to assist us and further this investigation so that we can bring it to a positive conclusion and close it out. And those times, I mean, they're still going to be tough, and that behavioral health team will be right there to support those families, those extended families, so that they can take those next steps in healing. So Taisha, that's how we're doing it here. We didn't invent the wheel, but we're excited that they're a part of our team. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Major Barton. It was a really good example of how communities can work with the police department, but also that collaborative work with other stakeholders in the community. Again, thank you for sharing what's happening in Pueblo Poake. Just a quick reminder, please submit your questions for the panelists in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. We do have some questions there right now. Just a reminder to other individuals, if you want to ask a question, use the Q&A panel. It's our feature at the bottom of your screen. Dave, this next question is for you. Can you discuss why it's important to engage various law enforcement agencies when responding to MMIP?
Yes, I can do that. One of the things that's important in trying to have some type of positive result from a missing person case is going to be that immediate response. But even bigger than that, having the police department that is the primary agency responding to that case to be able to reach out to peer agencies in the region to have them assist and add more eyes and ears to the search. Major Barton talked about the TCRP, the Tribal Community Response Plan, and my work at the U.S. Attorney's Office with 29 tribes in the state of Washington. Unfortunately, COVID messed up quite a bit of that, but the Tribal Community Response Plan is a collaborative approach to missing person cases. So it talks about the police, the victim services folks, the community, and media working together in harmony to respond to a missing person case. But we also look at it at 4 different levels. We look at what resources does the tribe itself have to respond to a case. Another level is what do neighboring tribes, partnering tribes, what do they have to assist in a missing person case? And then locally, what does the county, what does the state, what do nearby cities have to assist in terms of shared resources and response to these cases? And then, of course, the national level with the U.S. Attorney's Office, the FBI, the U.S. Marshals in responding to these cases as well. So in the work that we do with the tribes, and by the way, the Tulalip tribe in Washington was the first tribe to complete their TCRP, and yesterday they received an award for using the community response plan to recover missing persons successfully. And that was done in collaboration with their peer neighboring sheriff's departments and police departments as per their TCRP. And so within that TCRP plan, I mean, there are, and you really can't hide it, but there are jurisdictions where tribal police and local sheriff's departments do not necessarily play well in the sandbox. And so one of the things that we're doing at the National Native Center of Excellence is to build upon that by offering multi-jurisdictional conferencing where we can come in to tribes that are not necessarily working well with their local outer law enforcement agencies and have a conference and try to develop and build those relationships, build bridges, understand that by working together, we have a better chance for better outcomes, and just basically build that bridge across jurisdictions. I personally had experience with that as chief of the Nez Perce tribe in Idaho, where we didn't necessarily get along very well with our local sheriff's departments, and so we did hold 2 multi-jurisdiction conferences there in an effort to establish those communications and relationships. So if the tribe and the local sheriff's offices and the state police are all working well together, that just simply creates a better avenue for successful recovery of missing persons.
Thank you, Dave, for explaining that process, and well done to Tulalip for completing that. And it's good to know that these things are happening. And thank you again for sharing that information. Well, you've each answered a question, and I like to call this next one the lightning round. So we have a lot of questions in the Q&A portion. We are going to go through those questions as best we can. Please continue to submit your questions in the Q&A feature. All the resource links you see in the chat will be emailed later today to anyone within the recording. I'm sorry, to everyone within the recording of this conversation. Starting with, again, the first question. Major Barton, I'm going to send this one your way. How can victim service providers and MMIP advocates strengthen relationships with law enforcement?
Thank you for trusting me with this one, Taisha. I think it's a two-way street. It's not just the service providers and advocates, but it's also the law enforcement teams, whether they're reaching out and building those relationships and creating that conduit of information, or vice versa, the service providers or the MMIP advocates speaking with their local law enforcement officers and agencies, whether it be grassroots on the side of the road at a gas station, and striking up that conversation, and the law enforcement officers running it up the chain of command to their command staff and their leaders, but vice versa, the leaders in law enforcement, we need to take the role and be in those community servants and reaching out and building these bridges, because if we don't do it now, then when we need them, they're not there, because there may need to be MOUs or MOAs, memorandums of understanding in place. Sometimes there may be contractual services that need to be worked out, and all that stuff should be done way in advance to prepare for the unfortunate event that something of this magnitude happens. And we're all on the same page, and we can all move forward together in unison to assist families, loved ones, friends of those that may have gone missing or have been murdered. So that's how we've kind of approached it here, Taisha. We do have our own team in-house, but we have spoken with them and they've developed and worked on those relationships to help support any response we may have as well. And then unfortunately, our MMIP advocate locally at the U.S. Attorney's Office is not there anymore, but we act and try to help as that conduit with them from our agency direct to them for support services if we would need them. So that's how we're doing it, and that's how I think we could strengthen those relationships. So thank you, Taisha.
Thank you, Mr. Barton. Mr. Dave Rogers, I'm gonna go to you next. You spoke of a few resources and avenues in which tribes can complete their resource response plan. If you could add to it, what national resources are available to tribal communities corresponding to MMIP?
Well, your government resources obviously include your U.S. Attorney and the FBI. The U.S. Marshal Service have a special team that works on recovery of children. And if the tribe were to make that request, they will assist. They do not take over the investigation, but they'll assist the tribe in trying to locate juvenile missing persons. They've been very successful in that realm. And then beyond government, you have national programs. I mean, like the American Red Cross, the Adam Walsh organizations. There's a number of missing person programs out there that are more than willing to jump in and assist with that as well. So when we work with the tribes, we ask them to sit down and just brainstorm everything from the tribal level all the way up to the national level as to who they could call upon to assist them. As Captain Merrill pointed out, in Alaska, there are times where you may be calling out the U.S. Air Force or the Coast Guard. That's not probably going to happen, for example, at Pine Ridge. They're not going to need the Coast Guard out there. So each tribal community response plan is special just to that tribe, because what one tribe has, another tribe doesn't have access to. So you can't really copy them and just put a different name in there. It really has to be designed by the tribe for the tribe. And so we just provide guidelines. And the other things that we're adding to at the National Native Center, we're adding prevention and we're adding healing to our program. Those were kind of missing at the U.S. Attorney level. So we're very strong proponents of traditional and tribal-based healing and tribal-based approaches to healing and to prevention.
Thank you, Dave, for that response. I think it's really important that one thing you mentioned was how everybody's different. All the tribes are different, but what's happening in Poake with the good work that they're doing, or with the tribe and community you mentioned in Washington, they could be examples for other communities to look at what's working for them and maybe apply it to their own communities' resources or their response. So again, for our participants, these are great, wonderful resources here that we're sharing. We're learning some good stuff about specific communities who've done good. My next question is for Captain Merrill. There are a few questions that are focused on something you mentioned in your response regarding the navigators. So I'm going to give you two questions. They may or may not be related with one answer, or be able to answer in one answer. We have a question regarding what are the necessary credentials for the navigator role, and can that be shared, is one question. And the other question regarding navigators is how should victims approach if they feel unheard? And they have navigators in that question. So again, one, what are the necessary credentials for the navigator role? Can that be shared? And maybe the work that you've heard from the navigators, how should victims approach if they feel unheard?
Okay, that's some great questions. So for the credential part of it, absolutely, I can share that. I don't have that like readily available, but I have already actually sent a Teams message to my team that handles that and asked them if they can share that with me so I can provide it to this group. At the end, I'll make sure that my email address is included so people can reach out if they have questions about that, and I can provide more details. I think I saw a question there as well that was about funding. So in Alaska, those positions are specifically funded through a state of Alaska general funds. So it comes from the legislature, and those positions are funded directly through the Department of Public Safety. So they're hired within the Department of Public Safety Alaska State Troopers, and then we fund and pay for them through our budget. In regards to if you're not getting a response, so our practice has been in a case outside of a normal search and rescue. When I say normal, a non-criminal search and rescue, if it's suspicious in nature, or if we believe a homicide's occurred, because we only have 3 navigators currently working, we have several out for hire, we assign those navigators to reach out and talk to families. Generally, we ask that our navigators are talking or reaching out to the family at least once a month, and then adjusting that based on the needs of the family if they want less or more contact. Specifically in Alaska, if you're talking about a navigator, if you're not getting responses from the navigator, then you can reach out to the local commander. So for Sea Detachment or Western Alaska, that would be me, and you can ask for additional contact, and then we will make sure that we assign our navigator to reach out and make those connections as required. I'm going to jump on to one thing that David had said that I want to add about the community response plans that had popped into my head. One of the things that we found in our consultations, so here in Alaska, the FBI and the MMIP coordinator for Alaska at the federal level, when we sat through in the consultations with the communities, we were invited as the state troopers to participate in all those consultations as the tribes built their local plans, which was amazing because we had the opportunity to do some education and talk about our processes, so that as the tribe built their response plans, they built them so that they worked with us, and they didn't like say, well, the troopers are going to do this, when reality says we can't because our laws didn't allow us to do something. So we could answer those questions right up front. And so the response plans were developed in coordination with us so that we are all aware of how we work together, which was fantastic. And one of the things that came up there, and David said this, was about traditional values. One of the struggles we have in Alaska, specifically with murdered people, our state medical examiner is based here in Anchorage. And so when a person dies and the medical examiner wants to do an autopsy, we have to bring that person into Anchorage. And we have not always been sensitive to tribal customs and beliefs on how to care for deceased people. And so as a result of the community response plans, the SME and the troopers and the tribes have sat down and started talking about how to build in that sensitivity. So if a family has a traditional belief where they need to see a body or do a certain ceremony with the body before it's taken away for potentially 2 or 3 weeks, we're trying to honor that as best as we can while maintaining evidence that's on the body potentially, but also helping families have the ability to do some of those traditional practices if we're able to do that. And so that was just something that David had just pinged in my brain. That was something that we learned.
And Captain Merrill, you learned that information, or you took that into consideration by listening to the community. Is that correct?
Correct. It was as a result of the partnership in those community response plan listening sessions, where we would go in and we would talk about our processes, and the community would listen, and the community would tell us how our process didn't work for them. And we tried to take that information they shared with us and try to figure out how we can be better partners.
Thank you, Captain Merrill. All good stuff being shared here. Thank you again for all your insight. There is one question I see in the Q&A. I'm going to ask that all 3 of you kind of listen to it, and if you would like to answer, appreciate it. But I would hope that Mr. Rogers, you and Captain Merrill provide some insight in the work that you've been doing. The question is regarding human trafficking. The question reads, why is human trafficking being left out of MMIW, and why is it not being spoken of? I know it's kind of a difficult question to answer, but could you, I guess, collaborate or elaborate on the work of human trafficking and any parallels with MMIP, MMIW?
Well, if you don't mind, Captain, I'll just jump in there. But for my part, when we work on community response plans, we include human trafficking. We include that. I mean, the definition of a missing person is somebody that we do not know where they are. So that runs from a runaway or a potential runaway, a child that is not, we don't know where they're at, all the way to human trafficking, because a lot of the missing person cases can intersect with different events, including human trafficking. So in the work that we have done and what we're planning on doing, human trafficking is included in our work.
And I will follow up. So human trafficking is actually a specific part of our MMIP group in Alaska. We have actually held specific trafficking meetings to discuss that as part of our MMIP response. And the result of that has been coordinating so specifically Anchorage here in Alaska. Most everybody travels through Anchorage. And that's where a lot of our human trafficking from our local villages ends up ultimately. And so AST, working with the FBI, the Marshals, and the MMIP working group, have worked together to develop response plans and attack plans for addressing that with individuals. So for example, we just had the Alaska Federation of Natives conference this last week. A lot of people travel in from around the entire state for that conference. I guess in the lower 48 terms, it would be like a powwow. And the tribal leaderships come together, and we have anywhere from 20 to 30,000 people come into Anchorage for that conference. And in preparation for that, there were specific meetings held about how to have resources available to contact individuals who might be trafficked, who might be at that actual conference. And so it is a large part of what we do, and we have a specific plans being developed around that.
Thank you, Captain.
Hey, Taisha, can I jump in a little bit?
I was just going to ask if you had something to add.
You got it. Yeah. So part of what we want and what we're doing here locally, we run multiple operations for human trafficking at our hotels and casinos. We also scrub the dark web along with some public-facing aggregate sites that bring in potential trafficking victims. When we find someone, a potential victim that's local, we work with our surveillance teams at the casinos and also our officers to notify them should they maybe have a player's card or they check into the hotel. We have a name. We also have resources available through our behavioral health team. We also have the recovery center that's local, and they provide assistance with those trying to recover from human trafficking. Should they be a true victim, we can get them those resources. And the question that was in the Q&A, that person also asked another question in the webinar chat about any organizations that have help for survivors, whether it be support or financially. We do have that locally, and I'm proud to say we ran a cool little fundraiser this past May during we call it just MMIP month. And I think we spoke about that previously, Taisha. We made a special patch for our officers to wear to bring awareness publicly. And we ran a fundraiser for that and donated it to one of the recovery centers in support of any victim or family that may be a victim of MMIP. So I think for us, it's not just a response, but it's also how we can be proactive in our community to hopefully identify a potential victim of human and or sex trafficking and offer them those services as we have things in place already. So thank you, Taisha, for letting me chime in a bit.
Thanks, Major. We do have a follow-up question to your response in the chat. Someone is asking, can you explain what scrub the dark web means?
Absolutely. So there is a team that works at the Bureau of Indian Affairs. They this is all they do is human trafficking. And there was some chatter in the dark web. We won't talk about how to get to that, but they did find some stuff related to our area, reached out to us, and kind of brought that information to us, joined us for our joint operation. We did identify 3 potential victims of human trafficking. We did have services in place. We did run with it there. But as they follow up with services, we're not brought into that loop there. We just hope they continued with them. And what we do now is there's a great website called Spotlight. And Spotlight is an aggregate site that actually consolidates information from websites where folks may be victims of human trafficking or sex trafficking. And we identify those local based on geolocation that could be. And then we work with our teams locally at the surveillance, the hotels and casinos. We flag players' cards potentially if they're in the system. We run certain checks for potential, technological things that we can put in place. Maybe it's through a known license plate, and we can flag that in our system to see if someone comes in with them and they're, as on the street term, being trafficked and the person trafficking them, we can identify them and move forward with charges there. So we're trying to gather this information from as many sources as we can and be as proactive as we can to help these potential victims.
Thank you, Captain. I don't have any follow-up questions to that just yet, but thank you for being available to answer that quick follow-up. We're going to move on to, there is a question in the chat regarding liaisons, and it is a pretty lengthy question. So rather than read it verbatim, I'm going to ask that Mr. Rogers, you address this question. It is focused again on liaisons.
Right, I did read the question in
Okay.
chat. When we talk about how sometimes law enforcement has a difficult time communicating with families and so on and so forth. So yeah, in the community response plans, we discuss liaisons a lot because one of the big partnerships is between law enforcement and victim services. Victim services plays a huge role in this whole process. In law enforcement, if the person is recovered, whether it's deceased or not, once that's wrapped up, their case is pretty much done. But victim services is going to continue on for a very long time after the case is closed. And so the things that our teams, and it's up to them how they want to design this, but to have a person designated as a liaison that communicates with a family between law enforcement and victim services and the family, whether they choose a law enforcement officer to do that or if they pick somebody from victim services, it's completely what they would like to do and what's most comfortable for them. And so if they do pick, say, somebody from victim services, they will be in direct communication with somebody from the police department, and they will discuss what information can be shared with the family to keep them updated. And one of the reasons that victim services plays a good role in that is, let's say we have somebody who has not been recovered for a very long period of time. Sometimes families feel like they've been forgotten, that their loved one's been missing for months or years. And so victim services, when we discuss this, we talk about, just staying in touch with the family, touching base with them now and again, just to let them know they're not forgotten. And that if any new information and that opens up communications much better and keep that flow going. That's one of the complaints we heard in all the listening sessions is families were left in the dark a lot. And so this just keeps the communications open for them.
Thank you, Dave. All right, we've got momentum going here. We've got a lot of questions being answered. So participants continue to ask those questions in the Q&A. I've got 3 panelists who just can't stop talking. They want to answer your questions. I do see a question here. Again, I think I'm gonna send this to Captain Merrill, and then we'll see who else is willing to answer. This is regarding ACEs. Do you find that law enforcement you collaborate with generally have knowledge of ACEs and have received trauma-informed training? both of which make a positive difference in interacting with survivors' families?
So that's an excellent question. And just as a follow-up to, so I dropped a link in the chat to one of our most recent postings for a navigator position that has the
Okay.
qualifications and job description in it, and that's in the chat if you just look underneath there for me. So to this question specifically, so depending on the law enforcement agency, we're finding that some are trained and they are adapting to ACEs. The state of Alaska, so with our troopers, we have actually fully embraced trauma-informed interviewing and investigations. And so we're actually working through COVID. COVID messed us up because we had a plan to bring instructors in and train everybody. And we've now adopted it's an online training. That's one of the other struggles that I have specifically in my area is all of my trooper posts are not connected by the road. So the only way to get people to training is by flying them, which is it's expensive and it's difficult for maintaining coverage of posts. So we're using an online model for that. And we're sharing that. The state is actually paying for that and providing that to local agencies and with our local VPSOs. And so we absolutely embrace and understand the value and importance of trauma-informed investigations and in interviewing, and we have accepted that, and most of our Alaska agencies are using that. We're also finding our partners like the FBI they have some model that is similar that they're using.
Thank you, Captain Merrill. I know I should know this, but can you tell me what ACEs stands for?
Adverse childhood experiences. And so the model that we're using as the state of Alaska is the FEDI model. And that's the model that we're employing in Alaska.
Thank you. Sometimes my brain just doesn't fully work, but glad you're there to help me out, Captain Merrill. Thank you for answering that question. How do we feel, guys? We ready for there's one big question we're all gonna do. I feel like I can do this is the lightning round. We're just gonna do some quick responses. We ready? All right. Somebody is asking about jurisdiction, and I feel like this is a really good question because each of you comes from a certain and specific jurisdiction. We have a public law 280 state with Alaska, New Mexico. You have tribal jurisdiction there, and Dave's worked with many agencies with various jurisdictional boundaries there. But the question is, the panel, let me see, I'm going to read it verbatim. This is a massive question, but I'm wondering about the panelists' experience have been with your jurisdictional issues, how to change them, and how to help support families trapped in an extremely difficult situation. And I'm assuming the situation has to do with jurisdiction, and probably I'm assuming again that the MMIP or MMIW is a case with several jurisdictions involved. Captain Merrill, I see your hand up. I'm sorry, Dave, go ahead.
Go ahead, Dave, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say, jurisdiction is an issue nationwide with Indian country, and it's complex. It can be very confusing, and it varies from state to state and place to place, like you say, PL 280 and then other. But for example, one of the situations that I found was that a tribe would have a missing person, but they went missing off tribal lands in, let's say, a neighboring city. And that the neighboring city agency didn't take the case particularly seriously, or maybe even didn't take a report on it. This frustrates the family from the tribal community, and so they asked the tribal police, what can they do? So I'm aware of one big situation where the tribal police decided to go ahead and just take the case themselves and run with it, and they entered the information into NCIC, and they took it as the primary responder. This upset the other jurisdiction, and so it got to the point where city attorneys and tribal attorneys and U.S. attorneys got involved in all that. But it's one of those situations. I mean, it varies from place to place. Some tribes have excellent relationships with their neighboring jurisdictions, cross deputizations, whatever. But there are others that still struggle in this realm, which is why we try to build those multi-jurisdiction conferences. But sometimes you got to think out of the box. I don't know if the state of Washington has done this yet, but I understand prior to my leaving the state of Washington that they were looking at a state commission, law enforcement commission, to give to tribal investigators so that they can continue their investigations, for example, in Seattle or Everett or Tacoma on their own missing person cases, because the cities are swamped too. I know Seattle PD at one point, they only had one person working all missing person cases in the city. And so recognizing the manpower shortage, the state was considering that. I don't know if anybody from Washington can advise as to whether they actually followed through with that. I thought it was a good idea.
Thanks, Dave. Captain Merrill, I'm going to go to you and then Major Barton.
Yep. So jurisdiction is an interesting conversation, and it could be probably 5 or 6 of these meetings. As David had said, it's very complex. Alaska is unique because we are a PL 280 state, but we also complicated that even more with the ANSCA, the Alaska Native Claim Settlement Act. And so we don't have traditional Indian country in Alaska, with the exception of Metlakatla. Otherwise, it's ANSCA change that. But the one thing that, like I said, the state, for many years, when I started my career over 20 years ago, the state did not want to recognize tribal sovereignty. And we did not, the state did a very poor job of this. I am happy that the state in the last probably 5 to 9 years has started to change that attitude. And we're starting to work with our tribal sovereign nations in a more collaborative manner. And so one of the things that's nice for us is we don't have, that the pockmarked tribal reservation interspersed with city lands like in the lower 48. And so we don't have as many jurisdictional arguments, I think, but we are working with empowering our tribes who are starting to find their footing and having their own tribal police departments to do that. So, for example, just yesterday, we did a training on full faith and credit with tribal court protective orders. Not necessarily this, but dealing with missing and murdered Indigenous people, on how tribes can work with us as law enforcement to make sure that we have copies of their orders, et cetera. And so jurisdiction is a challenge for everybody, and I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Captain. Major Barton.
Thank you, Taisha. And I'll just kind of pick up where Cap left off. Jurisdiction is tough. And so for us, we've been navigating this for over 5.5 years. And we have many loopholes based on decisions way above our pay grade on how things were handled, especially as it related to old gaming compacts and stuff like that. So what we did is to create a model of self-sufficiency for our PD here to protect our tribe, its businesses, and all of its members and guests. So we have the criminal, obviously, for any tribal member from any federally recognized tribe we can charge. We also enacted a civil code in which we can charge civilly to any non-tribal members or non-natives that choose to commit a violation here. We've entered into a deputation agreement with the Department of Interior for the Special Law Enforcement Commissions, in which we'll have direct submissions to the U.S. Attorney's Office for crimes, as well as on the CVB docket, which essentially translates to a non-traffic citation. So we can kind of close some of those loopholes. And then we also are happy to say, as of last October, we are fully enacted with VAWA for any non-tribal persons that choose to commit crimes against a tribal member here. We can charge them, arrest them, and incarcerate them. And we currently have 4 non-tribal suspects, convicted suspects, serving jail time for crimes that they've committed against tribal members. So for us, jurisdictionally, our goal was to create a model of self-sufficiency where we could handle anything in-house. Obviously, there's going to be some major crimes that we would reach out to for investigators, and we've developed those relationships and partnerships to move forward. But that's how we've kind of navigated the jurisdictional nightmare that becomes our area. We have 580 tribal members Taisha here, and 17,000 people live within the exterior boundary of the Pueblo Puake. So there's a huge non-tribal population that resides here, whether it be in some of the housing areas that we have, the apartments, and then there's some land grant stuff from a long time ago that gives people the right to still live here. So that's how we kind of navigate that. If as they were talking about answering calls from neighboring jurisdictions. We're actually part of a tribal metro summit out of Albuquerque. Chief Trujillo, who's my supervisor, boss, and leader, he'll be attending that tomorrow and chatting about that. And they're pretty much holding monthly meetings at this point to try to educate all our law enforcement partners, whether they're tribal or non-tribal. So thank you for letting me chat on that one, Taisha. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Major. Dave, I see your hand up. Do you want to add something?
Yeah, just very quickly, because of some of the challenges with jurisdiction, some states do not recognize tribal police as bona fide law enforcement agencies. Idaho being one. They missed one word when they identify peace officers in the state codes. And so one of the things that some states have done, Oregon, Washington, other states, they've changed their state code to include tribal in the definition of peace officers, which give them that state authority. So like in Oregon, a tribal police officer is also a state peace officer. Up in Washington, they are within the boundaries of the reservation. That eliminates a lot of problems. Trying to fight through cross-deputization with incoming and outgoing sheriffs, it becomes pretty complex and difficult. So that's one thing that's happening across the country.
Thank you, Dave. And this is why we have the three of you on this panel. Each of you provide a different perspective from the communities based on your experience and, being right there in working and talking and listening to the community members. Jurisdiction is definitely a complex discussion. And like Captain Merrill said, we could probably be on 5 more of these sessions and still not totally grasp what is happening across the United States as it pertains to tribal jurisdiction or not. So we've learned quite a bit about your experiences, the work that's happening. Again, this whole event is about learning and sharing. And I think it'd be a good time right now to go into one of the last questions I'll have all of you answer. It's regarding training. There's a question. Says, what are suggestions for working with a law enforcement agency that is hesitant to come to trainings and events, probably regarding MMIP? And I'm assuming that's what the training and event is for. Again, so maybe offer some insight or support, encouragement on how to work with law enforcement agencies that are hesitant to attend these types of trainings or events.
If I could jump in on that one, there's lots of jurisdiction, or lots of places where sometimes the police and the community aren't totally well connected. And I hate to date myself, but going back to community policing, which the effort behind community policing was to establish that relationship between police and community. We developed a training just for that purpose. That's the training that we predicate before we go into the TCRP and all that other stuff. And that's really just how to come into a room and how to find common ground and how to overcome the challenges and how to begin to communicate and work together. Because you're going to have a difficult time building a tribal community response plan if people come in the room and aren't really comfortable communicating and working together. So we predicate our training with that training, which is basically collaborative team building and problem solving.
Thank you, Dave. Captain Merrill?
Major Barton, did you want to go first?
You're so kind, Captain Merrill. I think
well,
you need more time, don't you?
He had it ready to go, so I want to be polite.
The ball's in your court.
Like that. Hopefully I'll sink this jumper. I think the main thing if they're hesitant, they may be hesitant because they don't know them and they're just getting bombarded with training requests. Hey, come join us, come join us. And I think like we talked about our behavioral health team or those folks out in the community that can help support. That's that grassroots kind of bringing those individuals to the table before they're needed. Now, I think that even includes trainings because sometimes officers are like, well, how's this training going to help? Well, maybe shooting some emails to pave the way. Number one. Number two, hey, let's go have a cup of coffee and talk about these important issues that we can bring to you and your department, and close these loopholes that may exist. Or maybe just a cold call, knock on the door, see what's going on. But I think a lot of it comes down to making those initial conversations happen, whether it's starting out with an email to break the ice and then getting in the room with one another even before the training invites happen. So that's kind of how we look at things. When we've talked to some of our outside partners, like, hey, you guys should jump on this training. We think it's going to be a good one too. We're joining it. And I think maybe bringing in some other, for lack of a better term, the peer pressure from a different agency they may have a relationship with. Cops probably trust cops a little bit more than any outside entity for certain things. And sometimes that's what makes us unapproachable. But having an in and another way can help them get through that kind of initial phase. So, Cap, thanks for letting me jump in on that one.
I just get to say ditto, because that was exactly it. Was the relationship building is extremely important. And then one of the things as a consideration to think about is staffing. One of the reasons that we are struggling right now is do I send somebody to training or do I have somebody on the street? And unfortunately, sometimes I have to keep people on the street. So hesitancy isn't always about the training in particular. It's sometimes resources and whether we can have people attend. And so just keep that in consideration and have that conversation once you've built that relationship about why they might be hesitant. And then I agree with Major that it is. When I started this job 20 years, when I was in the VPSO program specifically, the tribes kind of like to browbeat us. And they were like, you're not doing this and you don't care. I mean, I had members of the community saying troopers don't care. And you leave people in the street for 3 days. And there was all these conversations that were really, it was difficult because my troopers do care. I mean, if you think about it, law enforcement officers do the job they do. We have a few that don't do it correctly, and we try to take care of that. But the majority of law enforcement officers truly care about their communities and they want to help. And so it's not helpful when the people we're serving are telling us we don't care and that we don't want to help. And so it's always helpful if we meet on that stage of, I love when a tribal community member will come up to me and say, this happened to me and it hurt me and I wasn't happy with how it turned out or what was happening, but I want to work with you and I love my state troopers. And that for me is the perfect place to start, is tell me, I want you to tell me if we did something wrong, but let's do it from a collaborative, an area where we can work together. And this area of training is a good place to start, is come in and tell us what you would like to learn, like ACEs or like FEDI or MMIP, and help us understand why it's important for you. And then that will help us get that buy-in to get people there.
Thank you so much for all of your responses and insight. All very good discussions. We could probably be here another hour just to really go into some of these topics. I'd like to quickly just take a pause here and acknowledge, I know there are a lot of questions what we haven't answered yet. I tried to get through those as much best I can. I apologize for not asking your question. No hard feelings, please. Don't judge me on that. I was just trying to pick good questions for our panelists there. I also wanted to quickly note, we will have a closing blessing. Our Sandra, our friend who will be doing the blessings, asking that we each have some water available for her prayer and her blessing. So if you do have some water, please have it available and ready for that blessing, just for your own purpose. And one last thing I want our panelists to consider, and I'll give you some time to think about that, is what would be one thing that each of you could provide that you feel is just like the most important thing to take away from this conversation. This is it. If we could have one message resonate for the rest of the day, and where people can take it back to our communities, can take it back to tribal councils to say, this is what we need to do. What would be that one thing that you would like each participant to take away from this conversation? I'll give you guys some time to think about that. And you cannot say ditto or anything like that. And I'm gonna go with, let's go with Captain Merrill.
That's what I get for saying ditto earlier. So I guess if I had one, and I'm probably going to steal Major's thunder here because he actually said it. So, like I said earlier, we recognize that we struggled and we're trying to fix some of those things. I think understanding that I put on a uniform every morning, and all my troopers put on a uniform, and whether they're tribal police officers or federal or state, we each come to work every day to serve, and we're human and we're parts of your community. And so the Peelian principles of law enforcement, basically, Sir Robert Peel, if you look back when he talked about modern policing, one of the quotes he essentially says is the police are the public and the public are the police, and we all work together, and the only difference is I get paid to do it every day as part of my job. And so that community related relationship has to exist. And we as law enforcement struggle, we separate ourselves, and we feel different because we see things the regular public doesn't see. And so recognize that your police officers see and experience trauma, and they see things that most people don't. And so recognize that we are human. And I think that's what Major had said earlier, is we're human and we are going to make mistakes, and be patient with us, because our goal is to help people, is to find people and to try to do that. And we don't always do a good job at it, but we try. And so recognize that we're trying to improve on our transparency. We're trying to improve on making sure we communicate with families. And then recognize, for me, one of the struggles is recognizing that we have rules to follow, unlike our criminal counterparts. And so we're always trying to catch up and stay on top of that. And so sometimes we don't share information because we can't, because the law says we can't. And sometimes there's limiters on what we can and can't do. And just be patient with us, and then ask us to be engaged with your community. And that's what I would end with.
Thank you, Captain Merrill. All good qualities to being a good human, right? Just be patient, have respect. Major Barton, we'll go with you and then close with you, David.
Thank you, Taisha. I think the one thing I would hope that anybody could take back is this is traditionally a law enforcement response. We're human, we make mistakes, but what we want to try to focus on in our jurisdiction, and what we talk about outside of here, is making this a community response and having so many people that are available. And it's hard to get everybody to agree on one topic when they're all at the table or all on the screen like we are today. I think by getting those vested parties in the room at the table, whether it's an email chain, a chat chain, and talking about what they can do in a response for a missing and murdered person, that's, to me, that sums it up. And it really struck a chord with me when we were working through this project, and it was called the Tribal Community Response Plan. And Dave had mentioned some stuff about that before in some of our pre-meetings, that, you know, it's community. We had the opportunity to speak with a local news outlet and bring some light to the work we're doing here. And that was one thing I echoed there too, is we want to change it from a traditional law enforcement response to a community response, because with everybody's help, we can have positive outcomes, and we can create these proactive relationships that not only work for the MMIP epidemic or MMIWR, however it's related in your community. We can build those relationships and we can solve so many other problems. It's not just that one, and they build that conduit to success and community growth, community survival. So that's how I would sum it up, Taisha. So thank you, and thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Major. That's a great segue to go back community response plan. I think that ends with you, David.
Well, I think to take away from this, I would say that tribal communities across this country, and as you know, most tribes don't really pay too many attentions to borders. We have family in Canada. We have family south of the border who are all suffering from this same thing. And people often ask me, well, why are Native Americans suffering from this problem more than anyone else proportionately? And there really isn't an ultimate answer to that. There's lots of risk factors that are at play in this situation. There is some historical events that play into this as well. But I think one of the things that I've seen happen over the last 4 years or so is how the tribes have been able to come together and to sit down and talk with each other and express their feelings and to come up with ideas that work. Sometimes when you come at it from a law enforcement perspective, you're working on it a kind of an operational mode. But when you can talk to community members, our elders, victims' families, and get their impressions of things that they experienced, it helps you build a better response to what's going on in the community. So I encourage the tribes, first of all, to recognize that the majority of law enforcement are there to help and to assist and be there to help recover our missing folks, and that they're willing to listen, as was demonstrated here today. I've had good luck in talking to a lot of different people from non-tribal law enforcement and tribal law enforcement who changed their perspective on how they viewed this problem once they were informed and once they gained information from the community perspective. So it's going to be better if we all work together. And I think that's the emphasis that this meeting had today, working together towards a better response.
Thank you, Dave. That in itself is actually how we began, Dave. When we had our opening prayer, the words were spoken, "Together we are stronger." And I think this was a perfect example of what that means. Each of you provide some great testimony on the work that you've been doing. I'm so grateful that we have people like you working for Indian country and working for tribal communities, Alaskan villages. Thank you so much for your work. A lot of good topics were shared here today. First of all, we're not finished yet. We do have a closing, but I wanted to just say thank you again for your time, your sharing your words. There's been a lot of things that were shared that were on repeat. We talked about recognizing resources. We talked about collaborative community work. There was even some notion to just listening to and providing and changing methods so that those traditional and those cultural needs were heard and acknowledged when doing these types of investigations. All really good work. And I commend each of you for bringing these topics to the table within your community and sharing your information, because again, together we are stronger. One last time, thank you to Captain Merrill, Major Barton, and Mr. Rogers, Mr. Dave Rogers, for sharing your experiences. We hope that each and every one of you that took this time to be with us today gained some new knowledge, maybe just open your hearts to understanding the role of law enforcement, the role of your community, the role of yourselves in supporting survivors of these types of crimes. As we all mentioned earlier, you will receive a recording of this discussion, and all links will be shared with you. Right now, we do like to close, and I mentioned Sandra asked that we have some water available for the blessing. Sandra, are you ready to offer our closing?
I am. Can you hear me? All
yes,
right.
Loud and clear.
All right, first I'm gonna do this as quickly as I can. I'm gonna light a small smudge. I'm stormed in at my daughter's in Mandan, North Dakota, which is all right. It's a good place to be, but I'm not in my house. So this shell that I'm using, it's its first time getting used. So hopefully it works. I'm going to just do a quick water blessing. Some of you probably already heard me speak before or know this, intrinsically or been told, but water is women's medicine, or the women are in charge of it, but it's everybody's medicine. I'll say it that way. Women are responsible for water and men for the fire. I should have had my sweetheart light the smudge, but anyway, so I'm gonna just sing the song is in Anishinaabe, and it says medicine water with everlasting flow, and I'll only do two push-ups for a lack of better words, but it just, whenever, especially when we talk about something like this, I think that the water that we are is affected, sometimes not in such a good way. I really think that the speakers, you guys did an awesome job today. I'm really appreciative of that. I wish I had you here in the Dakotas. Anyway, so okay, and Kagane Dung Mash Kiki Indigenous Cause. My name is Keeper of the Medicines is my name. Mere wabu, mere wabu, mere wabu, mere wabu. Kakagejiwan, mere wabu, mere wabu, mere wabu, mere wabu, kakagejiwan. And then I always take a little bit of water when I pray with it, and I pour it in my hands, or wipe it on my face, wipe it in my hair and on my heart, and then just drink it and ask it to be your medicine. If you have a specific ache or pain or hurt, you can ask it specifically to do what you need it to do. So thank you for the opportunity to do this with you all.
We appreciate you being here with us and giving us that courage to continue with the work that we're doing and giving us closure to this wonderful session that we had again today. It was beautiful. Well, folks, that wraps up another Talking Circle. We look forward to you joining a future Talking Circle webinar. Please take care, be well,